again, everyone, this is Mr. Owen, and in this tour we're going to be looking at the burial practices of ancient Egypt. That is right, we're going to be looking into mummies.
Welcome to Mummies of Ancient Egypt.
Now, Egyptians believe very strongly in an afterlife. Then they knew that a person's ka, or their spirit, would not be able to enjoy the many pleasures of an afterlife unless that person's body was properly prepared for burial.
The mummification process used by ancient Egyptians was highly ceremonial in nature. The different types of mummification took into account the social level and richness of the deceased and even included animals. The most expensive was that reserved for the pharaoh and the royal family, as well as some of the wealthiest members of the court.
Now, the more poor people could not afford the full practice of mummification, so their bodies were mostly just wrapped in their clothing and put into plain wooden boxes and buried in the ground, in sand, or possibly in a cave. Now, the wealthier had a much more elaborate ceremonies and buried their dead in tombs. Pharaohs, of course, had the most grand ceremonies of them all, being living embodiments of the gods on earth.
The first step was cleaning. Once bodies arrived at the mummification site, they were placed on inclined tables while the bodily fluids drained away. They were then cleansed by priests until they were deemed ready for the purification process.
Now, most importantly, the body would not be allowed to decay. Otherwise, their spirit would not be able to pass on to the afterlife. So they developed a process called embalming, which stops the body from decaying quite as quickly.
The purification of the body began with a libation from sacred water. The priest then fumigated the body with terebinth resin. After the ritual cleansing, priests used oils, spices, and all kinds of essences to further purify the body of the deceased. Finally, all body hair was meticulously removed. Once the body was properly purified, embalmers removed the organs, following very specific procedures. First, the brain was extracted by inserting a spoon through the nostril to break the ethmoid bone. Then, using a spatula, the pieces of the brain were removed as thoroughly as possible. What matter remained was extracted after a process of liquefaction, achieved through the use of a caustic liquid. The cranial box, once emptied, was rinsed and disinfected with palm wine, and then stuffed with strips of linen cloth and liquefied resin. After taking care of the brain, embalmers made an incision on the left flank and carefully set aside the viscera. The inside of the body was also rinsed with palm wine. Then the embalmers filled the belly with pure myrrh, cinnamon, and other perfumes, and sewed it shut. The removed viscera were washed in palm wine and packed in crushed herbs before being placed in canopic jars.
Canopic jars are these containers here, which have a very important religious purpose for transporting the body into the afterlife.
Canopic jars were placed close to the sarcophagus or kept in a chest nearby. At first, the viscera were wrapped in tissue and placed in the vases. As the ritual requirements became more elaborate, ointments, spices, and even water and natron were added to the process. Towards the middle of the New Kingdom, canopic jars assumed the appearance of the 4 sons of Horus. They were known as the protectors of the viscera. These protectors had their own guardians, each a goddess of the dead. Imseti, the human-headed god, protected the liver and was protected by the goddess Iset. Hapi, the baboon-headed god, protected the lungs and was protected by the goddess Nephthys. Dumut-Ef, the jackal-headed god, protected the stomach and was protected by the goddess Neith. And finally, Kebesenuef, the falcon-headed god, protected the intestines and was protected by the goddess Selket.
Now, here is the natron it mentioned, a salt-like mineral that helps dry out the body and keep it from decaying.
Natron is a naturally occurring mineral found in evaporite. These sedimentary rocks are made up of mineral salts and were generally mined from lake beds in Egypt.
Now, that helps moisture from getting in the body because moisture adds to the decaying process. So by denying it that moisture, the body is going to stay preserved for much longer.
Embalmers used natron as a desiccant to dry the flesh and stop the corpse's putrefaction process. Once the body was cleansed and eviscerated, the deceased was covered in natron for about 40 days. Once desiccated, the body was prepared to be wrapped in strips of linen.
So 40 days packed in that salt-like mineral is a very long time, so this process took several weeks from the point that the individual died to when they actually finally made it into their tomb or pyramid.
Once the body was fully desiccated by the natron treatment, embalmers oiled, painted, and sometimes even added hair extensions or a wig. They often used a henna-based antiseptic preparation to give the body a more colorful and lively appearance while preparing it to resist molds and fungi.
Making it look more lively, still done today. At funerals, they will add makeup to the deceased person so they look more alive and not quite so very much deceased.
Next came the phase which gave mummies their most well-known appearance, the wrapping. Originally, each part of the body was wrapped separately. Men had their arms crossed on their chests. In addition to the jewelry and amulets arranged on the skin of the deceased, amulets were also carefully inserted into the weaving of the linen strips. Each amulet was linked to a myth or to an ideological belief related to rebirth.
These amulets had religious importance, just like if someone laid a cross or Star of David onto the body of a deceased Christian or Jewish individual as a sign of their faith as well.
Masks were an important part of a mummy's finery. Early wooden funeral coverings were very expensive, however, and soon replaced by masks created through a technique known as cartonnage. Masks fashioned with this method were created by laying several layers of linen or papyrus pulp on a base made of mud or straw. Cartonnage was used for more than funerary masks. Ornaments and the animal coffins of the late period were also made in such a fashion.
Now you're going to see a full body sarcophagi instead of just a mask here.
Cartonnage evolved to cover the entire body of the mummy during the 22nd dynasty. The mummies were placed on a board inside a rigid envelope of cartonnage, which was laced at the back with a string. Extremely cost-effective and visually pleasing, this technique was very popular through all layers of the society. Cartonnage envelopes were usually covered with inscriptions and polychrome decorations, specifying the names and titles of the deceased, scenes depicting daily life, or decorations specific to the funerary world. This was a true gift for Egyptologists eager to study the funerary rites of the ancient Egyptians.
Now, pharaohs, very early in Egypt's history, would be buried in pyramids, like the Great Pyramid of Giza. However, as the centuries and millennia went on, they started to put them into tombs or secret locations to prevent grave robbers, people breaking into the pharaoh's tombs to steal the many riches and treasures they were buried with, to prevent them from using them in the afterlife. So this concludes our tour of burial practices and mummies of ancient Egypt. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new, and we'll see you all next time.